Titchwell Marsh, the RSPB's premier reserve in North Norfolk. Bounded by Titchwell Church to the east, Thornham Marsh to the west, and the beach and the sea to the north. Just behind the sand dunes is a saline lagoon that floods with seawater on all but the lowest tides. And separated from it by a seawall is a brackish marsh with carefully controlled salinity. South of that is the freshwater marsh fed by underground springs. There are also extensive reed beds and deciduous woodland. A mix of habitats that a huge number of birds find irresistible. Over 300 species have been recorded at Titchwell, more than 200 species are logged every year, and well over 70 can be seen in just a few hours, including rarities such as this black-winged stilt that stayed around the reserve for 12 years. The RSPB bought the land in 1973, and after 6 years of mud, diggers and back-breaking labour, a seawall was built across the salt marsh to create the brackish and fresh marshes. And the birds responded immediately. The very next year, bitterns were nesting in the reed beds along with 3 marsh harrier nests, and then in 1984 avocets bred for the first time, joining other marsh and reed bed specialists. Titchwell is today one of the RSPB's most popular reserves. There's a well-equipped visitor centre. Large hides overlook the marshes and reed beds, and the visitors flock in. About 100,000 people come each year, not just highly experienced birders, but also absolute beginners from far and wide, and from all walks of life.
Got lots of teal. And shovellers, there's 3 shovellers.
On the water diving.
It's spring now, and the thickets and reed beds are alive with new arrivals. Male sedge warblers and reed warblers, just back from their arduous migration to Africa, call for females. They sing incessantly all day and well into the night, hardly stopping for food until they've gained a mate. They're here for just 3 to 4 months, time enough to raise 1 and sometimes 2 broods. On the brackish marsh, avocets are already paired up. Most will have spent the winter in the West Country, but a few are overwintering here, now that North Norfolk is not as cold as it used to be. Overhead, a male marsh harrier pursues one of his females. And then goes into his roller coaster skydiving display. Which ends at the proposed nest site, which she seems to accept. Soon he's flying in with nesting material. When he has established this nest and the female is on eggs, he will try to set up with another female, probably not far away, and look after both of them. On the fresh marsh, coots, moorhen and a variety of ducks are also starting to breed. And around the visitor centre, small birds take advantage of all the help that's given. Just 10 miles southwest of Titchwell is Snettisham, another RSPB reserve, on the eastern side of the Wash, the largest estuary in Britain. When the tide recedes, a vast expanse of mud is revealed, the perfect feeding place for huge numbers of water birds. The Wash is Britain's most important place in winter for waders and wildfowl, with over 1/3 coming here. And Snettisham Reserve itself can regularly attract 100,000 of these. Right alongside the Wash are the pits. These are lagoons formed years ago when shingle was taken out for the building industry. The RSPB constructed islands in the pits, and several species of birds now nest on them. Amongst the hundreds of pairs of black-headed gulls is a recent addition. In 2004, Mediterranean gulls nested successfully here for the first time. This year, 3 pairs have started to breed. And on a shingle beach, well away from the crowded gull islands, several pairs of avocets are nesting. At Titchwell Marsh, the avocet season is slightly more advanced. Every year, over 30 pairs breed here. Sometimes over 50 pairs attempt to breed. Avocets are a recent success story. They first bred in England in the 1940s on the Suffolk coast, and after a slow start, they now number at least 1,000 pairs in England. The coots have bred successfully, and the parents are having a hard time keeping up with the constant demands. By now, young water birds are everywhere. Mallard, shoveler, and Canada geese. Spring migrants coming up from Africa continue to arrive. A pied flycatcher en route to Scandinavia. Yellow wagtail heading for perhaps the nearby Ouse washes. Gargany, maybe to breed here. Temminck's stints, scarce spring migrants probably for Scandinavia or Russia. And turnstone heading for Arctic North America. Deep in the reed bed, Titchwell's star breeding bird shows itself whilst on one of its fishing forays. A pair of bitterns bred at Titchwell in 2005 for the first time for many years, thanks to careful reed bed management. Despite this, their numbers are still very low nationwide, and their success is not guaranteed. Another fish eater demonstrates its technique with eels. High above, the male marsh harrier comes in with prey and makes the food pass to the female. She must be on eggs by now and even feeding nestlings. On the fresh marsh, birds continue to call in. Sandwich terns, probably non-breeders, as are these little gulls. The avocets are constantly bickering and sparring, and for good reason. 3 chicks have hatched at one nest and within 30 minutes are up on their feet. The adults do not feed them, they just encourage them to leave the nest and get down to the water's edge. They're extremely vulnerable to predators at this stage in their lives and also feel the cold in this stiff wind. The following day, the chicks are a lot stronger and able to feed themselves. To the south of Snettisham pits is the Salt Marsh, a remote area that gets partially flooded on the highest of spring tides. It's a place beloved by birds of prey. At least 2 species of owls have been seen at Snettisham, like this barn owl that nests in the village of Wolferton, just over the way, and short-eared owls that quite possibly have nested on the reserve itself. And 16 species of diurnal birds of prey have been seen here: a kestrel and sparrowhawk, and peregrine falcon, marsh harrier, and the rarer Montagu's harrier that every year have 1 or 2 nests in Lincolnshire and Norfolk. Oystercatcher and ringed plover are nesting just above the high tide mark, and exceptionally high tide is always a danger. But still not all the migrants have passed through, such as this grey plover in full breeding plumage. In the pits, the black-headed gull's breeding season is advancing. Young chicks are everywhere. The Mediterranean gulls have also been successful. And on the shingle bars, the late breeding common terns are at last on eggs. On Titchwell Fresh Marsh, more migrant waders are hanging on before the final push to their breeding grounds. Not in their breeding plumage. And black-tailed godwits. Dunlin. And little stint, dwarfed by other small waders. On Thornham grazing meadow, a grasshopper warbler reels away. Juveniles are everywhere now. Pied wagtails, avocet, redshank, gadwall. And then, quite suddenly, well before Midsummer's Day, the first of the northern breeding migrants are back. Female spotted redshanks, still in perfect breeding plumage, have left their breeding grounds in the low Arctic, leaving the males to continue incubating the eggs and raise the young, and have flown south, their breeding season over. Not far behind the spotted redshank females are male ruff, probably having successfully taken part at a lek site in Holland and Scandinavia. They have mated with a few females and are now back here, taking no further part in the breeding cycle. And then British breeders call in. Ringed plover, and the slightly smaller little ringed plover. The reed beds that were a rich brown in winter have turned green with the fresh stems going through. Summer vegetation is at its peak. Some birds take it easy now. The spring rush is over. This is the time for dragonflies. The fourth spotted chaser, the mighty emperor, Britain's biggest, and damselflies, the large red, the azure, the blue-tailed, and the small red-eyed, first found in Britain in 1999 and spreading rapidly since then. At Snettisham, the breeding cycle continues. In the pits, the Mediterranean gulls have done well. 2 pairs have both raised 2 youngsters to the fledgling stage. On the shingle edges, the late nesting common terns look like being successful, and some avocets are trying again. The spring flowers, sea pinks and sea campion, have come and gone, and now the summer flowers are at their best. Hoary mullein, viper's bugloss, weld, yellow-horned poppy, and tucked away in the long grass, red hemp nettle, found on only one other coastal shingle site in Britain, and at Titchwell, the rare matted sea lavender, found only in Norfolk and Lincolnshire. It's mid-July now, and the reed beds are alive with large groups of bearded tits looking for insects. These youngsters are after bloodworms on the drying mud. The group will break up with the onset of autumn, but many will stay the whole year at Titchwell, changing their diet to seeds in the colder months. Just east of Fenhide is a wet grazing meadow. Cattle are brought in during the summer months to control the vegetation. This provides breeding areas for lapwing, redshank and skylark, and feeding areas for owls. Young marsh harriers are on the wing now. In an average year, Titchwell will have 3 or 4 nests, with each nest producing 3 or 4 fledglings. In a few months' time, they will have dispersed down to the Mediterranean or further south into Africa, but in recent years, a few have overwintered in southern England. Is this the result of global warming? Whatever the reason, marsh harriers have done superbly well. From just one breeding pair in 1971, there are now something like 360 breeding females in Britain today. Another bird of prey calls in, an osprey on its way down south to warmer climes. Over 200 pairs are established in Britain now, another conservation success story. And then predators of a different kind. Arctic skuas have come in off the sea to see what they can find. And harry unmercifully an unfortunate black-headed gull. Nothing is ignored. The summer progresses. The waders are back from their northern breeding grounds, mostly still in their summer plumage. It's low water at Snettisham, but soon the tide turns. It's a big spring tide. The oyster catchers are pushed inland by the rapidly advancing water. The knot fly in to take up new positions. Finally, with very little mud left to stand on, the oyster catchers take off and fly just a couple of 100 metres to the pits. There they're joined by Dunlin. More oyster catchers come in. And more Dunlin, up to 6,000 could be here, and the same number of oyster catchers. The knot make their move. 10,000 or more taking the short flight to the pits. They will have bred in the Canadian high Arctic and Greenland and are now down here for the rest of the year, staying on the Wash or moving around the North Norfolk coast. The hubbub dies down and the birds take a rest. Curlew sandpiper starts to feed again. And a common sandpiper. The spring tide is no sooner at its full height than it turns and begins to ebb. The first back into the shallow water are redshank. In the pits, the knot know the tide is dropping and off they go. Back out to the Wash and their feeding ground. The golden plover, also back from breeding, probably in Scandinavia. Passing through are curlew and wimble. Also on the fresh marsh are young ringed plover and young little ringed plover. The big late summer wader migration is now underway. Scores of dunlin are arriving, avidly feeding after their long flights from Iceland, Greenland or Scandinavia. They're mostly first-year birds who've not experienced the rigours of the migration and so have to stop to refuel more often than do the overflying adults, who put on more fat before starting their journey. Places such as Titchwell, Snettisham and the Awash are vital to these long-distance travellers. A juvenile ruff and then curlew sandpipers. Titchwell has had over 100 of these at one time. A little stint with the prominent white stripes on its back. And a temic stint. A dainty red-necked phalarope. And then an elegant adult wood sandpiper. In the car park, the fruiting season is well advanced. A young greater-spotted woodpecker finds the apple trees, and the elderberries are sought after by many. Wood pigeon and blue-tit, blackcap and garden warbler. And there are other berries, seeds and insects for numerous different species. Chaffinch, goldfinch and greenfinch. Dunnock and wren. Chiffchaff and willow warbler. Juvenile reed warbler and lesser whitethroat. Amongst the elderberry is a climber, white bryony. Its berries turn from white to red and are extremely poisonous. Legend has it that only 15 are needed to kill a child. How many to kill a female blackcap? The migration continues at Snettisham. 2 young dotterels stop by for a couple of days. As do wheatear and windchat. And way out amongst the golden plover, a buff-breasted sandpiper, blown across the Atlantic by strong westerlies. In the pits, 2 juvenile little stints race along at their usual breakneck speed. And others demonstrate their food-gathering techniques. It's the end of September. Days are shortening now. A comma looks for nourishment on the dried up elderberries. A common darter keeps an eye out for a late flying insect. A chiffchaff still calls from the car park bushes. A goldcrest is on its constant search for insects, as is a blue-tit high up in the sycamore, where it's joined by a yellow-browed warbler, a rare visitor from Siberia. It's becoming more common in recent autumns, and indeed some are now overwintering. And then a real winter visitor, a group of hooper swans on the fresh marsh, probably completing a non-stop flight from Iceland to Britain to enjoy the mild weather here. Snipe forage in the recently cut down reeds. The common snipe and the migratory jack snipe here from Russia or Scandinavia. Why do they bounce? Duck numbers are building up. Widgeon, teal, shoveler, pintail and goldeneye. Grey plover are now in their drab winter plumage. As are turnstone and bar-tailed godwit. Gannets drift down the coast. As do great crested grebes. And the occasional guillemot. Behind the dunes and the long grass is a Scandinavian visitor, a Lapland bunting searching out seeds and insects. And then, with calls as beautiful as their appearance, a group of cranes, either from East Norfolk or the continent. After a break of a few hundred years, a small breeding group established itself in Norfolk in 1981, but their numbers are not increasing, and they could so easily disappear again. Mid-October, and another great event occurs at Snettisham. Pink-footed geese have come down from their breeding grounds in Iceland and Greenland, and are here in North Norfolk for the winter. They roost out on the mudflats, and then at sunrise they leave the safety of the estuary and fly inland to forage for food. Their numbers fluctuate, but can peak at 50,000, a sixth of the world's population of pinkfeet will be roosting here on the Wash. They range over West Norfolk, looking for fields of newly harvested sugar beet, where farmers have deliberately left plenty of scraps for them, so as to encourage them to stay there rather than search for fields of unharvested winter cereals. More winter migrants come in off the sea at Titchwell. Fieldfares and redwings, all attracted by our mild winters and readily available berries. And a ring ouzel, probably also from Scandinavia. Bullfinches come into the car park bushes for the delicate blackthorn shoots. And then once every few years, when food supplies run out in Russia and Scandinavia, these superb waxwings grace our shores. And every now and then a few oddities drop in, escaped cage birds like this cockatiel, and on the fresh marsh, a black swan and cattle egret. At this time of the year, there's a lot of work to be done on the reserves. The reedbed alone takes over 30 days of maintenance each year, carried out by several members of staff and volunteers to provide suitable conditions for the breeding reedbed species. Snettisham, a dawn count of pink-footed geese as they leave their roost is undertaken several times during the winter, coinciding with similar counts at other roosting sites in Norfolk to determine their exact numbers in the area. It also gives an indication as to how well Snettisham is supporting its birds from year to year. Guided walks for visitors take place at both reserves. Snettisham has over 20 guided walks each year to show visitors the pink-footed geese and waders on high spring tides, and Titchwell has at least 3 guided walks every week throughout the year. As dusk approaches, more golden plover fly in, with sometimes up to 2,000 in the flock. Little egrets roost nearby in the trees to the east side of Titchwell Marsh. Magpies have their favourite roosting tree. And in the reed beds, where a few months ago marsh harriers were nesting, hen harriers have a roost, just resting quietly on a grassy tussock throughout the night. Out in the Wash, it's another big spring tide. And in the dawn light, huge numbers of knot come into the pits. Over 60,000 are in this one vast flock. Over 71,000 are in the pits today. After a couple of hours they grow restless. They know the tide is turning. Bar-tailed godwits return to the newly revealed mud. And the knot follow. snow buntings search the shoreline for scraps, as they do on Titchwell beach, along with shore larks. And in the older trees along the west bank path, a variety of birds come in to take advantage of the seeds. Goldfinch and greenfinch, siskin, lesser redpoll, mealy redpoll, and Arctic redpoll. But this is nevertheless a hard time for many birds, and so additional food is put out near the visitor centre, and the birds flock in. Amongst the more common chaffinches are the occasional bramlings, migrants probably from Scandinavia. And it's not just small passerines that benefit. Even water rails come in. And close by in the thick vegetation, a woodcock, digging for invertebrates, a bird that has declined dramatically as a breeder in Britain in recent times. Out on the fresh marsh, the Brent geese have a couple of close relatives. Black brants have come down with the Brents from Siberia. They visit Titchwell Marsh most winters now. It's December now. Winter tightens its grip. Over 3,000 common scota and a few velvet scota are just offshore. Here for the mussels and cockles and other molluscs, easily obtained by diving in the shallow water. Also assembled are goldeneye, their males forever displaying. Then eiders, and occasionally a rarity such as this young male king eider, a real Arctic species. More birds pass through, red-throated divers, Slavonian grebe, and then a group of long-tailed duck, a true sea duck that can dive to 50 metres in search of molluscs and crustaceans. Storms are frequent on the North Norfolk coast, and after a good blow, masses of razor shells are cast up on the beach, and birds gather to feast on the easy pickings. Sanderlings and purple sandpiper. Not. Redshank and Brent geese. and at least half a dozen species of gull. Merlins sometimes stay for a few days, checking on the linnets and other small birds on the beach. Flurries of snow can occur at any time in winter and early spring. But eventually the days lengthen and signs of spring are everywhere. This ruff shows the beginnings of summer plumage. The avocets are back in big numbers and sorting themselves out. A male shell duck courts a prospective mate. The golden plover are gaining their black bellies. The marsh harrier male is patrolling his territory. And at last the first spring migrant returns, a superb male wheatear, and the year cycle begins again. But for how long? How much longer will Titchwell Marsh remain as we know it? Global warming, sea level rise and coastal erosion pose massive threats to low-lying areas such as Titchwell. These ruins on the beach were once an RAF gunnery observation post, built high and dry amongst the dunes just 50 years ago. Rising tides and storm surges are eating away at the man-made and natural defences that have so far defended the land behind them. Predictions are that by the end of the century, sea levels could have risen several metres. Unless all nations of the world pull together to halt global warming, an enormous task, Titchwell Marsh in Snettisham may one day be no more. But the RSPB is anticipating this and is creating new reserves further inland so that the future of our birds in surroundings as beautiful as this is secured forever.